Welcome to the podcast series showcasing the winners of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. We established this award to honor the outstanding contributions of individuals nationwide who work tirelessly to advance core pillars of Dyslexia Canada's mission, ensuring that all Canadian children have access to universal early screening and evidence-based, systematic, explicit foundational reading instruction. Right now, just over half of Canadian children are living in provinces committed to implementing that. Significant progress and movement in British Columbia have been driving change. Our guests for this episode are part of that movement, Superintendent Robin Gray and Associate Superintendent Darlene Reynolds, who are with the Cowichan Valley School District. Congratulations to both you and your team. The Cowichan Valley School District is located on Vancouver Island. There are a total of 20 elementary, middle, and secondary schools in the district, and the district has introduced screening and implemented evidence-based reading instruction. Now, what motivated the decision to go ahead with that implementation proactively ahead of any provincial requirement?
What started this implementation would have been a deep data dive into our students and their achievement. And also, while we were looking at that, it was in conjunction with us developing our strategic plan for our school district.
So what have you noticed so far? Any noticeable improvements or success stories to share?
Well, I think that we began this journey approximately 4 years ago. And when we noticed that we needed to really work toward a literacy framework and the use of evidence-based practices was when we did the data dive into student achievement across our school district. And then when we looked at developing our strategic plan, our major first priority was around learning. And in that area of learning, it was around the learning of foundational skills of literacy.
Yeah, and thinking about things that we've noticed so far. So this is our second year of implementation. And for me, I've done this work in other districts, but I've never worked with a district where it has come to life so quickly with our teachers and education assistants and administrators working together. So some of the absolute specific improvements that we've noticed and heard about from, we call it street data here, hearing from our principals, is that collaboration with teachers, like teachers having the opportunity to have common data that helps them identify their students' learning needs and having the resources to address that real time has been significant. We've seen lots of examples where school teams are looking at learners' needs, and instead of focusing on it's a student in my class or my grade, they're actually regrouping, working together to target students' needs in order to impact that change. And another improvement too is we have some schools that have students who we refer to as priority learners that have lots of needs. And we have so many exciting stories where principals will come out and they'll be like, Darlene or Robin, we've never had students come up to me and say, oh, is it time to read again? Or is it time for us to work together? And teachers just really being excited about the work as well.
Do you think that is what is driving it at its core?
I think that what's driving it is it's collective. Our superintendent absolutely was focused on the North Star to impact student learning and to ensure our students were empowered as readers. Our board of trustees believed in the work. Our administrators, our principals, vice principals have been part of the learning so they can have the conversations with teachers. And we have a really strong group of teachers who were deeply embedded in this work too. So it's not been a situation where it's felt top down or bottom up, but just an opportunity where we've all worked together to be focused on the reading achievement.
Is there anything that has been a motivating factor for either of you to be involved in this kind of work?
I'll start. I would say that we always want to have our students be able to have that sense of lifelong learning, the ability to really navigate their future world. And I think that when you ask me about what's the motivation, I think it would be to ensure that the next generation of our learners in the Cowichan Valley, that they have all opportunities available to them.
And I think we both just have such a deep belief that education is an opportunity to break down any barriers that children have in their lives for their best opportunity for their most abundant life. For myself, I've got a couple of personal stories that really have been a part of this journey. One was, and I know Robin's heard the story before, early on in my teaching career, I worked with a group of learners who were identified as learning disabled. And one of them one day got really angry and frustrated. And he knocked over his chair and he pointed to another child and said, "Why can you read and I can't? Did someone sprinkle magic dust on you when you were born and missed me?" And I just remember that moment being so impactful because that day at that time, I didn't have the knowledge I needed as a teacher to do that work for that learner. So during my career, I got to be a part of a school that were really focused on implementation of evidence-based practice and watch it come to life, but also recognized it took collaboration as a team and that myself as one teacher never had the ability by myself.
Well, it definitely sounds like to make this all work, you really need that support and for everyone around you to buy into it right from the top down.
Yes, I'm just going to respond to that. I think that overall, we have so many people who are championing this work. And I think that whether it's the Board of Education or it's our senior team or principals or vice principals or our EAs, teachers, support staff, all of us are working toward the same common goal. And I think that it has become part of the narrative here in the Cowichan Valley School District.
In your district's strategic plan, you identified learning, improving foundational skills as a key goal. So what are some of the strategies that you've put in place to make that happen?
Initially, when that became our key goal, we recognized that we needed to resource those efforts. And so we hired a district principal of literacy and numeracy. And so the work there began really around looking at some of our assessments, as well as organizing some teacher coordinator time at some of our priority schools where we knew that they needed the support. And those coordinators, along with other educators who had an interest, began actually learning more deeply around some of the practices that would make a difference. And so that was really the beginning of that work. And as we've progressed, we now have a team that crosses our district overall to support teachers in the work.
You've also been working with First Nations communities. Can you tell me about the process that you've put in place there?
Yeah, our First Nations are critical partners to the work that we do. And so when we were developing even early the literacy framework, that is sort of our guiding document, we actually developed that in collaboration. So there was our Indigenous Education Department, our Inclusive Learning Department, and our actual Learning Department all co-chaired the development of that. So we ensured that all voices were part of that work. In addition, as we've worked with our local nations, who many of them have educational liaisons, we can meet with them, talk to them about their learners' data. One of the exciting pieces that emerged recently is that we supported one of our coordinators to have some summer work. And she worked with one of our local nations' educational liaisons, and they provided intervention for the learners all summer long. So one of our intervention programs is Dyslexia, and so she actually worked with that nation to implement that. So now the students have access to that learning, not just during the school day and after school, but over the summer months as well.
And considering the value of getting to kids early with this type of education, that probably makes a lot of sense.
It does, and it actually gives opportunity for us to connect with families. So learners actually, their parents get to understand what the work is and what their needs are and what their next steps are as readers.
Teachers are often left to identify or develop instructional materials, and it can be complex and time-consuming. But to prevent that from happening, your framework identifies a variety of evidence-based instructional resources for each grade level and critical skill. Can you tell us more about that?
It's kind of funny because that was one of the pieces that I was convinced we had to have, and some folks were sort of like, no, we don't need that, but it's proven to be really important. Some research that I did early on and actually lived as a teacher is that teachers make change when they believe it is important or good for their learners and they believe they can do it. There's so much information and misinformation with online resources that teachers can really get swallowed up into that and not be able to get access quickly to evidence-based instructional resources. So by sitting down and looking at what are some common goals we have for each grade level, ensuring our teachers had direct link and access to the resources, it's really empowered our teachers to bring this to life without feeling overwhelmed.
How are you monitoring the progress of all the learners?
With the development of our learning framework, we also, parallel to that, developed what we refer to as learning inventories. The long-term vision for our learning inventories is that they're going to be checking in on our learners' progress in literacy, reading specifically, numeracy, and written expression. So to begin with, we've developed the reading inventories to start with, and they're in place for kindergarten through grade 9. So every fall, we check on our learners' progress in sort of a pre-assessment of what we hope they learned that year, and also checking in on some of the foundational skills from the prior year. And the assessments are designed so they're done in the fall, winter, and spring. But one of the differences in the way that we structured this is we really have focused on communicating to our teachers and to families that these assessments aren't judgments. They're not to be evaluative, but they're about each learner's truth in the moment for where they're at in their learning journey. So teachers can go in at any time and reassess a learner to see where they're at. So they always have real-time data. And then we can also step back and check to see whether there's learning needs at the grade level, across the district, or in specific classrooms to support that learning.
You recognize that despite excellent classroom instruction, some learners are not going to master the skills necessary to become independent readers at the same time or in the same way. Now, you've designed an explicit process for teachers to dig deeper when learners are not progressing as expected. Can you tell us more about the process?
Yeah, absolutely. It comes from a little bit of our conversations early on with teachers that sometimes in the past when we've done different assessments, it feels like those assessments are done for other people. They're done for district or ministry and didn't really directly impact instruction. So we landed around this phrase, so what, now what? So we see that a learner isn't where we hope they would be as a reader, then what could be the underlying factors? So our digging deeper process allows our teachers to look at if students aren't reading accurately and fluently at grade level. We have it linked so they can then start to drill backwards and see if it's a vocabulary challenge or comprehension related, or if we need to go farther, maybe it's a decoding issue or phonological awareness. So the digging deeper actually prompts teachers to go that next step. So if we identify, say, Darlene, for instance, isn't reading fluently, then we can check to see if it's just a decoding issue or if it's an oral reading fluency issue. And it gives our teachers those actual assessments that they can use to identify those needs.
And how else are you supporting the school teams?
One of the other differences that we made is, which I think we're really excited about and we're hearing that's having significant impact, is as a district, we've reallocated some of our financial resources. So instead of hosting in-service events where like 50 teachers come, and we may not be designing an in-service that meets their needs, we've reallocated those funds so that our learning coordinators, our student achievement coordinators, actually go into schools with like a substitute teacher. We call them TTOCs, or teachers teaching on call. And they go in and then they actually sit side by side with the classroom teachers, look at that teacher's data, identify what instructional resources or practices may be supportive for that group of learners. And so then instead of a broad in-service piece that may or may not be relevant to every teacher, we're actually sitting with teachers, looking at their data, and then helping them design instruction to meet the students' needs. And one of the other things we did that seems relatively small, but again, it refers back to what you mentioned earlier about teachers having access to resources. We designed literacy bins that are available here in our district office. So if I do my assessments in my, say, grade 3 classroom and I identify my students, there's a group of my students who need some work with multisyllabic decoding, these bins actually have at our teachers' fingertips activities to reinforce that skill prepped, ready to go. So as a teacher, I can pick it up. I can work with my education assistant. They can work with the students. So it's just really hands-on, and teachers don't have to go create it.
Well, that sounds interesting. And that's something that you created there?
Yes, yes. So we definitely did some research on evidence-based resources and practices, and used those to identify some really good activities that teachers can use to differentiate instruction.
What other initiatives are underway in your school district to improve the literacy levels of all students? And what's your vision for the future?
This year, one of our next steps is that we have several of our intermediate teachers who really feel like they wanted to grow in their understanding of how to support decoding and some of those teaching students how to read skills that they haven't had to do as much historically. But of course, we have learners in our schools that were impacted by a pandemic a few years ago. So teachers are having to address some skills that may have become lagging skills. And so this year we've purchased some licensing around those programs, doing some targeted in-service for those learners. In addition, Robin has a vision for involving our education assistants. And I don't know, you want to speak more to that, or if you want me to follow up?
Oh, I can speak a little bit more. I think that one thing that we know is that we have some great support staff in our educational assistants that work side by side with students who do have those lagging skills. And so under the direction and supervision of the teacher, looking at some of the quality practices that have been put in place, they would be able to support our learners. And so we're looking to create a bit of a learning series, learning sessions that can actually support our educational assistants to become more fluent in this work so that they can be working side by side with our learners to actually grow their literacy skills.
Robin, do you have any advice for superintendents like yourself that have just started implementing evidence-based reading instruction and universal screening?
I was just going to say, I think overall that we have a regular, consistent plan around professional learning that's across the school district. So there's a focus on teachers. There's going to be a focus on our educational assistants. And we continue to constantly, I think, look at every one of our professional development days and how do we support this work and create some learning plans around it on every one of those days so that we can look at a regular, consistent message around this is the work that we do in the Cowichan Valley School District. But I also think that we work very closely with our principals and our vice principals in terms of how do they work on their school plans to create a vision for their schools and their learners around this work.
I think one of the other things we did that was helpful is that, when you talk about phonics and phonological awareness and fluency and comprehension for families, that's a lot to process. And when you're changing some of your practices, it's important for families to understand what we're doing and why. So we also developed a video that we shared in our community so parents also understood what we were doing in the design of the framework and the assessments.
Well, I think that I guess it would be around, looking at your student achievement data. It would be also looking at some of your structures and your practices that you have in place for your district. But I think overall for a superintendent, it is really around creating the visionary map, the narrative, and that this is the work that we do around here. And that it's really our core business and how do we actually look at supporting our learners that we know are our priority learners around literacy instruction. So I think it's really around that communication. So I guess that would be my advice to any superintendents who would be interested in starting, or they probably already started this work, but actually continuing in this journey.
There are some provinces that have gotten on board already. But what do you think is holding other provinces back from embracing this style of reading instruction?
The overall public schools are busy places. and I think that there's always maybe some distractors, various things that can come into play rather than this particular work. But I think that in our district, we were really looking at how do we support the next generations of learners, current and the next generation, because we know that overall that our work is around, really building our community and their skills and their competencies for the future here where we can truly make a difference.
It's been great speaking with both of you, and it really sounds like you have some exciting things happening and that kids, parents, and really the community in general is benefiting from all of your work. So congratulations again on winning the award.
Well, thank you. We're very proud of the work, and we're very recognize that it wasn't our work. We often, when we're doing presentations, we'll share a circle. And it's because this work wasn't any one person's. It was truly a district collaborative effort. Teachers were at the table, our trustees, our principals, our vice principals. There was multiple points of input. And in fact, one of the things that we intentionally did is anything that was drafted went out for feedback for our teachers, and we brought it back in and made adjustments. And we did that with intentionality. So the work didn't belong to any one person, but belonged to us as a district.
We thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the series showcasing the winners of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. To learn more about this year's winners, visit dyslexiacanada.org, where you can read a blog about each of them. Now stay tuned for our next episode.